When we think about rights, we often imagine them as absolute, like you have a right to protest or you have the right to free speech. In Canada, though, those rights can come with limits, but sometimes courts and politicians disagree about what those limits should be. One way to solve this dispute is with what's called the notwithstanding clause. The notwithstanding clause is found in Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it lets federal or provincial governments pass a law that temporarily operates regardless of whether it accords with Sections 2 or 7 through 15 of the Charter. That includes rights like freedom of expression, religion, liberty rights, and equality rights. Governments don't use it often, but when they do, it sends a big message. We know that some people believe this law violates your rights, but we're going to let our law stand regardless. There are two main views on the notwithstanding clause. One is that it should never be used and that parliaments should always defer to what the courts say about the content of rights. The other view is that the clause exists for good reason. Sometimes judges and governments disagree about the best way to balance competing interests, and democracy favors allowing our elected leaders to have the final say, at least for a limited time. If citizens think that the government got it wrong, they can elect a new government, but they can't elect new judges. One thing is certain, the notwithstanding clause is part of Canada's constitution, and the Charter wouldn't exist without it. There are at least two premiers who wouldn't have signed on to the Charter without the notwithstanding clause. Let's look at some recent examples of how the clause works. First, Ontario's planned education strike in 2022. Here's what happened. Education workers, including early childhood educators, school custodians, and support staff, were trying to negotiate better pay and working conditions with the provincial government. When talks broke down, they announced a strike that could have led to school closures. In 2015, the Supreme Court had said that striking, that is, stopping work until your demands are met, is protected by the Charter as a part of freedom of association. This was a new and controversial interpretation of the Charter that overturned previous case law. The Ontario government didn't want the strike to go ahead, especially considering students had been out of school for so long during the COVID-19 pandemic. So they introduced a new law called the Keeping Students in Class Act. And here's the twist. They attached the notwithstanding clause to it. That meant even if the law did violate the Charter, no court could strike it down. People argued that using the notwithstanding clause in this way shut down negotiation, weakened unions, and went against the spirit of the Charter. But others said the government was right to do this. They said the Constitution really doesn't protect the right to strike, that the judges who found it did in 2015 were wrong, and kids should be able to get back to school. Facing massive public pressure, the government eventually backed down. Within a few days, they repealed the law and reopened negotiations. So what does this teach us? Well, it shows us that the notwithstanding clause is powerful but controversial. It's supposed to only be used in rare cases when governments truly believe it's necessary. Let's look at another example, Quebec's Bill 21. This law, passed in 2019, bans certain public sector workers, like teachers, police officers, and judges, from wearing religious symbols while on the job in Quebec. That includes things like hijabs, turbans, and visible crosses. The Quebec government argued that the law was about keeping the state neutral when it comes to religion, especially for public sector workers in positions of authority. The government said public servants should appear religiously neutral when serving the public. But many others argued that the law discriminates against religious minorities, for example, Muslim women who wear the hijab, Jewish men who wear a kippah, or Christians who wear a cross, or Sikh men who wear a turban. These people argued that the law goes against the Charter right to freedom of religion and the right to equality. And here's the thing. Quebec's government used the notwithstanding clause, making it very difficult for anyone to challenge the law in court based on those charter rights. Since then, the law has been upheld by Quebec courts and is now being appealed to the Supreme Court. Safe to say, the debate has not gone away. Let's break down these types of controversy. The Charter gives us individual rights, things like freedom of religion, expression, or the right to protest. These rights protect us, even when we're in the minority. Judges are expected to guard these rights by preventing the government from infringing on them, but the notwithstanding clause gives the governments a way to say, hey, we're doing it anyway, at least for now. And that's the other thing. There's a time limit. If a government uses the notwithstanding clause, it only lasts for 5 years. After that, they have to renew it or let it expire. That's one way to make sure power doesn't go unchecked forever. So here's the big question. When, if ever, should a government be able to use the notwithstanding clause? This matters because how we use the notwithstanding clause today can shape the kind of democracy we have tomorrow. So what do you think? Should governments have that power? Or should there be stricter rules around how and when the clause can be used? Or is public pressure, like what happened in Ontario, enough to keep it in check?